Hi, joining me today is Fredrik Haga, co-founder and CEO of Dune. Welcome.
Thank you.
Let's kick it off with a few questions about you. When and how did you first get into crypto?
I first got into crypto in 2015. I heard a podcast called Econ Talk, where I heard about Bitcoin, and it quite instantly made me curious. And I didn't understand all of it, but I got very quickly consumed by it and kind of directly fell down the rabbit hole. So I found this idea of internet native money and financial system very intriguing. I also ended up exploring a lot of interesting questions, which I think is part of why it's interesting to be in the crypto space. Is I had studied economics at school, but then when I discovered Bitcoin initially, I suddenly had to ask what actually is money and how does it work, and you get to all of these deep questions when you try to build a new system, and when you just stay in the more established world, you maybe forget to think about these kind of first principle questions. So that's initially what got me very excited and curious, and sort of kept my mind running, and then over time that also turned into more building and what can this technology do, and maybe more beyond just pure as a financial asset or crypto versus fiat, but also as a technology paradigm.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So you've been in the space for quite a while now. What's the most ridiculous thing that you've done or experienced in crypto?
Well, yeah, it's definitely a bit of a crazy world. I think one fun thing that happened to us, when we did one of our earlier investment rounds, there was an angel investor that wanted to invest, and he said he would put some money in, and we said, here's the paperwork, here are the investment agreements. And he said, oh, well, actually that looks complicated, so I can just send you the money. I don't want to sign anything. And we said, hey, I mean, it's very simple. Like all the other investors are doing it. This is completely standard. We will and he was like, in the Telegram chat, he was just like, yeah, no, sorry, this sounds too much legal stuff. So I'll just send you the money, and then I don't bother signing the thing, no worries. And he then literally in the Telegram just sent us several thousand USDC, sent the transaction hash and said, yeah, you go. I just want to support you, no worries. And our lawyers were absolutely mind blown. They had never before seen an investor that didn't want to do the paperwork to get the actual shares. So, yeah.
Yeah, pretty crazy. Was there ever a moment when you considered quitting the crypto space?
Not really, not sort of voluntarily, but we had a really hard time raising money in the beginning when we started in 2018. So we were actually just 2 weeks from having to quit, do something else. We had been running Dune for 7+ months without a salary, without any funding, and it was really hard. And so Mats, my co-founder, and I, we were at Eat Denver in early 2018, and we were literally sitting in a cafe and saying, what do we do when we get back home? We have no more money, and no one's investing in us, and we believe in this, but this is sort of not sustainable anymore. But then luckily at that same trip, we met someone from an accelerator, and we got accepted, and we got our first pre-seed investment. But it was a close call.
What do you consider your biggest achievement in crypto?
I'm quite proud of the Dune community and all the people coming together to work on crypto data, and also the fact that many of our creators are not developers but have learned a new skill set with Dune and are contributing to specific sort of projects and communities, but also the broader industry with insights and dashboards. And we've built a way for them to level up their skill sets and for them to contribute to the whole industry without having to be a developer and be super technical, but still be very powerful. So that is something I find quite exciting, and I'm proud of that people have built careers by building on top of Dune and learning to write SQL queries on Dune.
Let's talk about Dune a little bit. You've mentioned already that the project was founded in 2018. What was the original idea behind it?
So my co-founder and I were playing around with smart contracts before we started Dune, building some prototypes and doing some hackathons and things. And we realized that it's really hard to get the data out of the blockchain. It's in theory open, but in practice very hard to work with. And we also knew that if you build technology products, you're going to care about understanding your users, understanding data. You build something, does people adopt it? Is there any engagement? Are people coming back to use this product, or they're dropping off? So we were convinced early on that you need this data if this industry should succeed. You really have to understand if you're getting usage. And so we focused on that and realized that there's no easy way to do this. And then over time, we also thought more about the implication of the data being open and how much more powerful it is to build a product that is more open and let anyone access and build together as opposed to closed. And I think this is something that we only kind of understood in the beginning, but over time, really thinking deeper about this, and when we started building, realized this is actually a huge paradigm shift from, historically all data is produced inside of companies in a closed environment. Maybe your team is looking at it, but most of all the data that exists on the internet is within organizations and teams. But for the first time, a blockchain represents a public by default dataset that produce more activity every single block. And that is a world of activity that you can actually understand as a community together as opposed to in a closed setting. And this is something that we care a lot about. And I think one of the things that we have done right at Dune is to very, very much focus on this angle instead of building the same tool that existed before, but for crypto, actually think deeply about the implications of open data and really trying to help as many people as possible come together to work on this data.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that you started without any funding and that it was quite hard at the beginning. Do you have any funny story from the project's early days?
So it was only me and my co-founder for 2 years. So for quite some time, and it was just the two of us, and we had to do everything. And for instance, there was a guy named Theo that now works at Uniswap, but he used to work at The Block as a researcher. And he did not have a technical background, and he wanted to use this data in his research. And then he discovered Dune, and we said you can write SQL to analyze data. And he said, yeah, but what about Excel? Like if you can give me this data as Excel files, I can like use it. And we said, no, you can't get it in Excel. But I said, like, I can teach you how to do SQL. So we had like a recurring call where I would get on the phone with him and sort of, brute force show him how to use the product. Eventually he learned, and I think what's exciting about Dune is like a lot of people get this, aha moment when they see how powerful it is to actually do a little bit of code to interact with the data. So yeah, there were a lot of these stories where we had to, do support, and not even just do support, but actually kind of, educate and hold the hand of early users so they would succeed with the product. And I think both my co-founder and I, we were very hands-on and very determined to make our users succeed, even though maybe the product was a little bit complicated. And so I think that's a funny thing to think about that. And even like it's not that long ago when I still did our support requests, and we've been a small team for a long time before we started scaling. So I think but it's been great to understand the users and know deep down, how they use the product. I think as a founder, that is really helpful, and not get too detached from that and be there sort of in the trenches and really making the product easier to use.
What is next for Dune? Any plans that you could share at this point?
Absolutely. We are rolling out a new API product, which is incredibly exciting, been requested for a long time. So Dune today is first and foremost a web application where people can analyze and visualize data together inside of our app. What we're launching now is any piece of analysis on Dune that produces a result. You can click a button and you get an API endpoint for that. So then you can go ahead and do trading and building and researching with this data in a very flexible way. So Dune is going from like a bit of a insights analytics type of product to more of an infrastructure that anyone can plug into and do things that we can't even imagine. So I think that is going to be a huge new chapter for Dune and for crypto data in the whole industry, because it is a lot of data with several of these new chains and systems. There's a lot of data. And another thing we're doing is letting people analyze across different systems, so cross-chain, cross-layers, and you can easily visualize and work with data from a 1-inch trade on all the different chains that you might be deployed to. You can then see it very simply across the board and see which systems are getting most traction, having most users, what's the relative trade size on this system versus that system. And so providing that is something we've invested a lot in, and is now live. And then so going multi-chain in the data as well, and then having APIs on top of that, I think is pretty powerful.
Mm-hmm. Let's move now to some more general issues related to the crypto space. Apparently, we are in a bearish cycle now. Could you name one good thing and one bad thing that's coming out of this bearish cycle?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's it's healthy to have a forest fire every now and then. An ecosystem gets better when it's tested, and so I think it's actually quite a good thing that there's a little bit of pressure and a bit harder times. And as we talked about, Dune came from hard times in the beginning, and I think that shaped us, made us more resilient and thoughtful about how we were building and what we wanted to do. So I think being resource constrained and not maybe having the best of times is actually very healthy for a startup and technology ecosystem. So all in all, I think it's going to be a healthy, shakeout. But of course, it's hard, and some projects that maybe could or should succeed might not get the funding or might never be started because it's perceived as too risky. So of course, it's I think the whole of crypto, a little bit goes a little bit too far out, both when it comes to the upside and the downside, and suddenly no one believes in this and thinks it's going away, and then it gets super hyped again. So I think that is the thing that's not great, and hopefully I think these amplitudes will go down over time, and as the space grows, there's less volatility, not just in the prices, but kind of how the whole industry operates. I think that would be healthy. That projects just spin up and then die a few months later is not super great. So yeah, I think there's pros and cons, but it is, as a builder, I think it's actually a useful sort of pressure to have. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's not just the crypto space that's in not so great shape, but the entire world's economy. What do you think? Is there any special role for crypto in these circumstances?
Certainly could be. I think it's hard to know exactly how and to what extent, but I think, as with Bitcoin's initial, invention back in 2008, 2009, those were hard times in the world and in finance, and I definitely do believe that this type of stressful environments can enable some entirely new solutions, and I do think that there are attributes to the current system that are undesirable, and just take, for instance, how a central bank is a group of people that sit in a room and have some information and decide what the interest rate is. And then when they've decided that has massive ramifications for the whole world. People lose their jobs and go bankrupt and all of these things because someone decided the interest rate is 4% instead of 2%. And I don't think that crypto obviously has the solution to how to do monetary policy or anything like that. But I think it's healthy that we have the ability to innovate around money, around finance, and try new things, and having this extreme sort of top-down motion around what's the price of money, which is the interest rate. I think is actually, if you sort of think about it from first principles, a little bit weird that we do it like this. But I also don't think there's obvious solutions how to do it in other ways, but at least crypto is allowing innovation, which I think is exciting.
Mm-hmm. Since the beginning of this year, we've seen some spectacular collapses in the crypto space, such as Terra Luna, Celsius, or Three Arrows Capital. What's the main lesson that we could learn from all of that?
Don't build Ponzi schemes and be careful with leverage. I think it's pretty much that simple.
Yeah, simple indeed. What do you think about crypto regulation? What kind of regulation would be ideal in your opinion?
I think it's important to realize that this is an entirely new paradigm and technology and sort of method for achieving the transfer and custody of scarce assets. So I think the way to not regulate crypto, or a bad way to do it, is to try to fit it to the old world. I think in kind of similar ways as the internet, opened a lot of questions around antitrust and speech and these things. And you have to fundamentally think about it in a little bit of a different way, because the way a newspaper decides what to print is very different from what content gets posted on social media and that whole dynamic. So I think a lot of the principles in the financial system and regulatory probably make sense, but if you try to sort of put a square in the hole, it's not going to work. So I think that's how I think about it is. And I don't know if this is how it's going to play out. I'm not sure I'm too optimistic, but if someone actually tried to understand crypto, tried to understand how it works and what the benefits are, and then you can kind of regulate on top of that, I think that is at least the right starting point. And then I think it's important to think about what is kind of like underlying infrastructure and what is being built on top of it. So the beautiful thing about crypto is that it's just like a relatively simple sort of protocol between computers that lets computers transfer value between them, or provably scarce assets, which is an incredibly powerful thing. I think if you at that layer try to put in a bunch of regulations, you're gonna make it very complicated and sort of take away a lot of the desirable properties of that system. So I think of this as like, if there's like a railway system through Europe, but every country decides what their rails should look like, and you have to like change train when you go through every country, right? As opposed to this like, this is a train line and this is, what it looks like. And so I think, the risk, since finance has come from such a local approach, and there are local rules and systems, and then you kind of have patched that together to create a global financial system. There's a risk that every country and every jurisdiction wants crypto to look like this or that, and I think that's inherently going to make it an unappealing system. Versus if you say, okay, actually, there's these basic rules, all the computers will follow this, but if you're like a country or a company in my country, and you provide a service to consumers, then you need to abide by these laws. I think that's perfectly fine, but the regulators need to understand sort of what layer of the stack they are regulating, and I think if they go too deep, that's going to be hard to enforce and make for like less innovative, less useful technology evolution.
Mm-hmm. What's your take on mass adoption of crypto? Are there any ways to speed up that process?
Oh, it's of course a massive question, and if I knew the answer, maybe I would have been an investor. But I think it's very unpredictable. There's clearly a lot of fundamental sort of user experience challenges in crypto. Custody is still annoying. Bridging between different systems is sort of risky and messy, and there's hacks in these things. So I feel like it's still relatively like a close to the metal experience across the board. It's clunky, and so I do think that we gotta abstract away a lot of that. Like most consumers are not going to buy a hardware wallet or like do any of these things. So the friction needs to go down, that's for sure. And then exactly what is the use case is hard to tell, but I think one can certainly see, for instance, sort of DeFi versus NFTs, whereas DeFi was more like, for the more geeks in the crypto space, and the like number of users is like relatively limited, even though the values are substantial. But of course, like NFTs had a way broader audience. So I think that is a at least indicative of like, you know, where mass adoption might occur, that the product needs to have more fun sort of to it than a pure sort of primitive. I think finance will be there and it's important and it can be integrated in these things, but it probably won't be the thing that like really drives adoption per se.
So you've just mentioned NFTs. Basically, can you imagine proper use cases for NFTs, like not in a not too distant future?
Yeah, I think NFTs is, even though the hype is gone and the volumes are down 97% in these things, and NFTs have retracted more than DeFi and DEX trading in these things actually. NFTs are even more down. But I think it's a powerful thing that creators can, from their browser, issue something scarce attached to their like brand and artistry, and sell it to their fans and make money from it. And that is a big deal, and I think a lot of music and sort of arts and cultural in general has like a lot of cultural capital. Like it matters a lot. Like people listen to music. These creators like really have an impact on the world, but the financial pie that they create from that is very limited. How much money the artists actually get relative to the impact they have on the world. And so I think NFTs is a potential way to grow that, sort of bridge that gap and let more creators live off of their creations and more folks become creators because they can monetize without middlemen, without having to be a certain place in the world. Like you don't have to live in LA or this or that. You don't have to go on tour necessarily. Like you can actually be on the internet, connect with your fans, and create an expression, and then actually monetize that. And I think also what is a little bit underappreciated about sort of the relationship between an artist and their fans is that the fans doesn't necessarily buy the item per se, they buy the connection with the artist. And so if you buy a band t-shirt, like it's just as much the connection and the feeling of having something that's scarce and being part of that community and expressing sort of your affinity for this artist, as much as it is like a t-shirt that actually keeps you warm, right? And so similarly, I think NFTs, can serve a similar function. And I think a lot of critics kind of say, oh, but there's nothing there. But it's like inherently a lot of these things are feelings based and sort of a cultural phenomenon more than a practical matter. So I think NFTs are still exciting. They how it should be done and like all of that probably needs to be rethought a little bit, and you can't just like do a bunch of JPEGs and sell it and everybody's gonna pump it and whatnot. Like that reality is over, and I think that's fine. But I think fundamentally, there's a new type of file format and tool that creators can use that's exciting.
Mm-hmm. But what about metaverses? Is it just a buzzword, or do you think there are some promising use cases?
It's definitely a buzzword. I think when you have like, there's a lot of like hardware and sort of challenges in making it into a pleasant experience. And I think typically how you should bring a segment like that to market is to build maybe more for the high end in the beginning. So, the iPhone was expensive initially, and then eventually it became cheaper and like the smartphone reached a big audience. So my sense is that it probably needs like a niche where people can actually pay for expensive headsets and these things. Maybe that's industry or virtual meetings, I don't know. And then from there maybe get the price of producing the hardware down and then reach more use cases. But I think it's the whole right now it's very non-tangible and more of a buzzword, I would say. And honestly, the connection between crypto and Metaverse seems a little bit unclear to me as it is. So I think it's directionally potentially interesting, but also, yeah, I doubt it will have a massive impact in the next few years.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for talking to us, Fredrik.
My pleasure.